Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's episode of College Financial Preps Preparing for College podcast. So excited to have with us Cary Jacobson, who is an attorney in Maryland. Welcome, Cary.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, so glad to have you here. At College Financial Prep on our podcast, we're always discussing different topics as people are preparing for college. And we don't discuss often enough because we work with so many separated and divorced families. We don't discuss often enough the legal side of planning for college.
Mhm.
So that's why I'm so glad Cary's here to join us today. I'm in New York, Cary's in Maryland.
Yep.
And I know in New York, college planning is something that is mandated by New York State. It's not always in everybody's agreement, but you agree to talk about it when the kids are ready to go to college. But Cary, do me a favor. Tell us what it's like in Maryland.
Yes. So in Maryland, child support stops at the later of a child turning 18 or graduating high school. And the last option would be if someone turns 19. So, if we have someone who might be had been held back for a year or something like that. But generally, college is not required in Maryland. And so when we're doing agreements, it gets a little tricky.
So, do the parents what happens when, they college must come up? How do
College,
they tell us how it normally goes and what parents can expect?
yeah. So, it varies. Often as an attorney, I depends on which side of which parent I'm representing, right? But one of my big concerns is always looking at it from the perspective of if you enter into this contract, which is what a separation agreement is, and you say I am going to pay X amount or X percentage towards college tuition for my child or children, then no matter what happens, you are legally bound to do that, right? And so a concern as an attorney is, well, what happens if that person, my client, gets hit by a bus and is no longer able to work? Are they going to be able to financially, comply with this now contract? And so sometimes it's, do they have financial resources that's going to allow them to? Do they have a 529 plan? You know, are they going to get tuitions reimbursement from their employer or something along those lines? The other thing that I am cautious of is how close to college are we talking about? Are we working with clients who have young elementary school kids, or we have a scenario where we're working with people whose kids are going off to college in the next couple of years? That may also influence what my recommendation might be, because you kind of have a better idea of how what the likelihood would be that you're securing your job for the next few years versus 10 to 15 years.
And for everybody watching, they should know, it started to say that the rules are a little different in New York. Um, Everybody needs to check their rules in their state, right?
Yep.
Um,
Yeah, because
and
state is different.
every state is different. So, Cary, tell me if I'm wrong, but I believe what you're saying is going to apply to many of the states where college isn't required.
Absolutely. And the thing that is just concerning from an attorney's perspective is putting your client in a situation where they may not be able to fulfill that contract. So many times what happens is parents may decide, well, they're going to agree to pay a smaller percentage on paper. Doesn't mean that they won't necessarily cover tuition, to the full extent, but they may only contractually bind themselves to something that they know they can commit to. Um, the other thing that I commonly see is, again, using the Maryland example, is instead of parents saying, well, we agree to pay for college as a blanket statement. They will say the equivalent of a child going to in-state tuition at the University of Maryland, so that you have some parameters around what that may look like, and they're not necessarily going to the most expensive private school.
Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that so for everybody watching, because I know that this comes up in New York all the time, we use what's called the SUNY standard up to a State
Yep.
University of New York standard. So people think, oh, their children have to go to a SUNY. No, but if a SUNY costs $30,000, you're agreeing to spend up to $30,000. So it's possible that a student can go to a private college and it costs
Mhm.
$30,000. There's nothing stopping that student from attending that school. However, if the
Right.
cost is going to be $40,000, then you have to figure out where that extra 10 is going to come from.
Right. Right. And obviously working with someone like yourself, figuring out what the options are for that. Maybe it's financial aid, whether it's scholarships, whether it's something else,
Right.
parents have options. But legally, from to make sure that they comply with the contract, they only have to pay $30,000. Yeah.
Right. Right. So one parent, they may say, nope, I'm only paying up to this much. And the other parent may
Right.
say, okay, well, that school is important to me. So I'm going to pay the extra, or however it
Absolutely.
gets worked
Yep.
out.
Yeah.
Wonderful. So, do you see often where it's not in the divorce agreement, but then parents come back to you later on? And is there anything that can be done?
If it was not in the original agreement and now they're trying to deal with it, the only thing that can be done is that they can agree to do an amendment to add it. Um, that being said, I will say that I've worked with lots of couples, lots of families where they simply leave it out with the intention of agreeing outside of the contract that they're going to deal with and pay for it, or however they agree to.
Now, so all of the parents know um, there are different types of financial aid applications. Some financial aid applications, the FAFSA, only looks for one parent's household of information. And they're going to look for the parent that provides the most financial support for the student. And that can be either the custodial parent or the non-custodial parent who may be paying child support. So
Right.
it's not the custodial parent like it used to be. Um,
Hmm.
there's also another financial aid application called the CSS profile. And that application, depending on the college, they may request the financial information from both parents. And if
Hmm.
both parents are remarried, they may ask it for the financial information from now four parents. But the reason that I'm bringing all of this up is that, like, at a minimum, if you're thinking about college, certainly, and if nobody wants to agree to, how much they're going to contribute, certainly at a
Right.
minimum, agree that both parents are going to participate in the financial aid applications. Because if the other parent doesn't, that can get rid of any financial aid that the student would have been eligible for. So just wanted to recommend that to everybody.
Absolutely, that's a great point to for them to at least put that on paper, so that they can ensure that they are participating to the fullest and giving all of the necessary information and documentation, so that the child receives as much support as they can, regardless of where the source is.
Right, exactly. I mean, and I do this all the time with families, divorced families, where we'll purposely select colleges that are looking for just one parent's information because it will help them financially, in terms of aid. So, just things to keep in mind as
Right.
you're approaching college and dealing with the legal side of it as well. Uh,
Yeah.
so what else can you suggest or recommend? Kids are getting
I would say
older. What should they include? What, education, what
Right. Well, I would say that the other most common provision related to college that we address is related to the 529 account, because many times the parents have already established those accounts. And so we may just address it from the standpoint of the parties agree that they're going to use these funds for secondary education, and neither of them are going to take any withdrawals from those funds without permission of the other. And then the last thing, which not that it happens very often because usually the accounts are exhausted, but if there happens to be any money left over in any of the accounts at the time, the child finishes school, what's going to happen with those funds? Now that there has been a recent change where those funds can be rolled over to a Roth IRA on the benefit of a child, most couples and parents have kind of agreed that that is the approach they want to take. They kind of have said, we have saved these monies for the purposes of this child, and we want the child to benefit from it. So usually they will kind of agree that they're going to roll that money over. Otherwise, before that change, a lot of times it was, whatever's left, if there happens to be anything, we're just going to split.
Right. But if there is money left over in a 529 and they go to split it, there's the potential for penalties and tax consequences. So if the people have like a younger child, or it may be better to roll it over to a younger child or another family member to use the funds, so that way there are no penalties.
Right. Yeah. But now that there's the Roth option, in my mind, why not take that option? It's going to benefit everyone in the long run. And again, it doesn't happen too often, at least in my experience. Yours may be different, that there are monies left over in the accounts.
Exactly.
Usually people are able to find a way to use those funds.
Have you ever experienced problems with clients? Like, tell us, we're thinking about college from the very, very beginning. What about when the student's already in college?
I don't, yeah, I mean, I would say I don't typically have too many issues, at least for the clients that we are working with. That being said, I work with most people who are doing mediation, and folks get really creative on what they're going to include in agreements. I've had scenarios where couples, child or children are already in college, and they've talked about other expenses, travel back and forth home so many times a year. What was I'm trying to
there are a ton of expenses.
Right. Other expenses they may pay, whether it's rent or, for off-campus housing, whether it's just some sort of monthly stipend that they're going to provide for a child. So parents can do whatever they feel is appropriate. And sometimes this is like just a split of expenses based on what the parents are going to do. Right. And so those are things that we address as well, really just based on one particular family's situation.
Some other items that parents may want to consider. My understanding, fraternity and sorority costs can be $2,000 a year. May want to include that in an agreement. There's dorm insurance, there's tuition insurance, there's, tutoring if the child needs tutoring. There are so many expenses related to college that
study abroad.
Exactly.
Yep.
Though I have heard, and this has nothing to do necessarily legally, but I've heard that studying abroad, sometimes it's cheaper than the local campuses.
Right. Yeah.
So may want to look into it just to save some money.
Absolutely.
And this was just coming up with a client I was just talking to, so I'm going to bring it up. Do you have suggestions for how parents track things, hold each other accountable to paying? We don't want them to wind up back in court.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So if parents are trying to reconcile expenses, there's a couple of different options for handling that. Low tech way would be like a Google Excel, like a Google sheet of some sort, where each person is putting in their information as to what they paid. And, every family is a little bit different as to how often people want to reconcile those. I would say monthly or quarterly is probably the most appropriate. There are other like parenting apps that people can use. So Our Family Wizard is a good option. There are many others, but basically you can upload receipts. You can, show documentation to support it, and it will keep an expense tracker. So you just really have to get on the same page with what is the methodology that works best for your particular family. So that it logistically works for you.
As a divorced parent myself, you know, I know that all this extra stuff can be like a second full-time job. Do whatever's going to be easiest and make your life easiest. Simple low tech could sometimes be better. They're all different ways to handle things. Whatever's going to work
Absolutely.
best for the family, I know.
Right.
um, what other guiding words of wisdom would you give parents that are, about to embark on college planning and doing it in the middle of planning for divorce? They're overwhelmed. There's so much going on.
Yeah.
Any wisdom to
Um,
share?
I would say again, check with an attorney in your state to determine what is required. And then look at from that perspective, do you want to have it on paper in a contract that you are going to be required to, follow? Or do you feel comfortable enough with the communication you have with your co-parent, with what has transpired in the past? Do you trust this person to uphold a verbal agreement? And that's really where it comes, in my mind, where it comes down to.
And let me ask you if this would work.
Mhm.
Would it work in an agreement to say, we will revisit it by 11th grade? I'm making this up.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
then what does that look like?
Well, so if it can absolutely be, we will revisit it. It doesn't mean that when the parties do revisit it, that they have to agree to,
Oh.
you know, to actually take any change. But it does mean that they are at least having a conversation about it. And so it's all in how the document is worded.
So for the parents, I know that often the kid is going to school in the fall, it's coming up quick. The parents haven't agreed. What are we going to do? And then they want to rush back to court in July or August. When should they really be, thinking that they need to go to court?
Right.
Like, can you
So
help with the timeline?
yeah, well, so I guess this would be in a state where this is mandated, because if it was in Maryland, there would be no point in going to court because we couldn't address it. But
Got it.
otherwise, every court is going to be a little bit different as to how long cases take. But I can tell you from my experience with regular cases here in Maryland, it can take a year before something is decided. So college is not necessarily going to be something that's considered an emergency that's going to get treated in a very timely manner. So I would say at a minimum a year out, just to be safe.
Yeah, so definitely put in your agreements 11th grade
Yep,
that you'll revisit. Yeah, because that'll be the time to know, to give you enough
right.
leeway before going to college, before the
Absolutely.
students go to college.
Yeah.
Wonderful. I am so happy that you were able to join us today, Cary. Thank you for sharing all this information.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I hope it was helpful.
Oh, definitely was. I know that there are always lots and lots of legal questions. Do me a favor, tell us where everyone can find you, please.
Yes, on our website, which is jacobsonfamilylaw.com. And from there you can find us on all of our social channels.
Wonderful. Thank you. And
Thank you.
thank you everyone for joining us today. College Financial Preps Preparing for College podcast.